classic cars of the Cuban capital. 1950s imports from the United States before the Cuban Revolution overthrew the government and the trade embargo took effect, necessitating the preservation of these nostalgic relics. This week, though, they were among many others in long lines for gas. The Cuban government has a major budget deficit. It's spending far more than it's taking in. To help address economic struggles, the nation's communist leaders had planned to raise fuel prices by 5 times what they are now. Needless to say, it was a deeply unpopular decision. It would have made a tank of gas unaffordable for Cubans with average incomes. The plan led to long lines and long waits as Cubans queued up to top off their tanks while they could still afford to. But hours before the 500% price hike was to take effect, Cuba's government suddenly delayed it on Wednesday, saying there was a cyber attack, a computer virus from another country that targeted the Caribbean country's fuel marketing systems. Now it's not clear when or if the dramatic price hike will happen. Welcome to this Groundhog Day edition of The World from A to Z. We'll have a bit of history on that coming up. I'm Carl Azuz, and Fridays are awesome. Yesterday, we told you how some experts are suggesting that China might be subtly taking a side in the war between Israel and Hamas. One thing the Asian country's been clear about is that it opposes attacks on civilian ships in the Red Sea. Houthi rebels in the nation of Yemen have been targeting vessels there. They say they're doing it to oppose Israel in the war in the Middle East, but the threat of these attacks is affecting shipping far beyond the Red Sea.
Shipping research from the London Stock Exchange Group estimates that diverting a tanker from Asia to northwest Europe around the Cape of Good Hope adds almost $1 million per voyage, while doubling the shipping time. How much of that will be passed on to the consumer is not yet clear, but some analysts say the impact may not be as dire as feared in the short term.
The value of the shipping service is actually a very, very small fraction of the total value of the good or service that you're buying. So there is actually limited scope for that to seriously cause inflation.
The severity of the impact will inevitably depend on the length of the crisis.
Initially, we thought this was going to be a fairly short disruption. Now I think our base case is more going towards month of disruptions, and that means a lot more cost.
The International Monetary Fund warned this week that attacks in the Red Sea, coupled with the ongoing war in Ukraine, risked spikes in food, energy and transportation costs. They also warned that if there were to be an escalation into a wider conflict in the Middle East, it would threaten global growth.
It's not the shipping costs themselves that are getting out of hand. It is if this endangers energy supplies. Then we'd see oil prices rise. Then we'd see gas prices rise.
Disruption in the Red Sea follows disruption of Ukraine's wheat exports after Russia's invasion. It also follows chaos in the shipping industry during the COVID pandemic. Another reminder of just how sensitive global supply chains can be to unpredicted shock.
On this date in world history. February 2nd, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed. It officially ended the Mexican-American War, and for a $15 million payment, the U.S. acquired the land of present-day Arizona, California, Nevada, New Mexico, and several other states. On this date in 1852, the city of London opened its first public toilet. It was called a public waiting room, and men who needed the loo, were they called losers, could use the facilities for 2 pence. Women's public toilets would come later. And this was the date in 1887 when the first Groundhog Day was held. Told you it'd come up again. It's like the same thing over and over. It was a publicity event in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, the namesake of Punxsutawney Phil, and it recalled a medieval European method of trying to predict the weather.
Franklin Roosevelt holds the record with 4 presidential election wins. Now presidents are limited to 2 terms. For more election connections, visit periodicpresidents.com.
World of knowledge. The royal sun angel, black-throated mango, and Andean hill star are all species of what? Melons, woodpeckers, flowers, hummingbirds. These are just a few of more than 320 species of hummingbirds that exist around the world.
Katya Latouf enjoys feeding hummingbirds. Nothing unusual about that. Oh, I should mention, they're hovering around in her home in Mexico City. Her apartment serves as a clinic, right now for about 60. Latouf isn't an ornithologist, she actually studied French literature in school. But amateur bird lovers and expert scientists alike use her makeshift clinic as a reference. And people send birds for her to care for.
I get mostly babies. I get a lot of them broken or picked on by grackles. Grackles are not from Mexico City. They were brought here, imported, and are destroying nests and birds.
In some cases, they have wing injuries, or maybe they've gotten infections from the many contaminated bird feeders in the city. Latouf started caring for hummingbirds in 2011 when she found one injured and a friend who's a veterinarian encouraged her to care for it.
Then I said, where am I going to put it? So I took out my glasses case and put him in there. The case was a Gucci case, so I named him Gucci.
After that, friends and neighbors brought more birds to her. She studied about them to learn how to care for the delicate creatures and hasn't turned a bird away since. Latouf started getting really busy after someone posted a video about her work on social media. At first, most of the hummingbirds stay in Latouf's bedroom. Once they're strong enough to buzz around and feed themselves, they're moved into another room. Then they're prepped to be set free.
The first of the two schools we're recognizing today is in the town of Stratford, Connecticut. Miss Mac's class is there, watching from Stratford High School. Great to see y'all in the Constitution State. Moving west from there, we land in Michigan, in the city of Warren. A warm welcome to Miss Bishaw's class, or Bishaw's class. Warren Woods Middle School is on the world from A to Z.
Most of you did not agree with the activists who threw soup at the Mona Lisa earlier this week in an effort to raise awareness about food. At McClure Middle School in Kennesaw, Georgia, Mrs. Bourne's class voted about whether we think the art should have been souped. Only one of 29 students thought it was a good idea. Mr. Kane's class responded that protests should be peaceful. The message gets lost when people try to destroy humanity's masterpieces. In Ralston, Nebraska, Mrs. Kelly's class responded. They are trying to show the need for food awareness while wasting food. There are better ways to make a point. And Miss Freihover's class at Emporia High School wrote that if outside audiences are not happy with your actions, they are much less likely to support the cause. These comments were generally echoed by Ms. Sabiga's class from George Fisher Middle School in Carmel, New York, but the protesters were successful in raising awareness around their cause. And this came in from Mrs. Bradford's, Mrs. Island's, and Mr. Pryor's classes in Keene, New Hampshire. They got a mention and a lot of attention. For a bunch of tension, they are in detention with absolutely no pension, questioning people's comprehension. Hey, I'm no Carl Azuz, but thank you for the thoughtful and creative feedback at youtube.com/@theworlda2z. I'm Lindsay Wolfgang Mast.
Not the first time this has happened. A toddler in Australia recently encountered one of those use the claw to grab a stuffed animal machines, and he thought outside the box by climbing up inside it, rather than attempting to use the claw to get him out, because as we all know, those claws never capture anything. The boy's parents wisely called police, who wisely had him turn away while they broke the glass and lifted the toddler to safety. Glad they had a good grip on the situation and decided there was no clause to cuff the kid, even for attempted theft. People who claw their way into merchandise containers don't usually get helped out. Then again, you never heard of a fast crawl away when it comes to cops and toddlers, and who wouldn't take a measure of pleasure at leisure among treasure, even if it can get a little stuffy in those things? I'm Carl Azuz, and Fridays are awesome! Didn't I say that already? It's like it's Groundhog Day on the world from A to Z.